My name is Jason, and I always thought that nothing could break my nervous system. But one day I decided to go fishing in a small town in Maine. An ordinary trip for relaxation turned into a nightmare for me that does not end even in my dreams. I reached my destination early in the morning, pitched my tent near the lake, and enjoyed the nature. The peace and quiet all around was perfect for fishing. But as the sun began to sink below the horizon, I noticed something strange. A strange light appeared in the dense forest, not far from the lake. I decided to go see what it was. With each step, I could feel the hairs on my neck rise more and more. As I got closer, I saw an old abandoned house. The door was half open, and candles were burning inside. I felt a cold sweat on my skin, but curiosity made me keep moving forward. When I went inside, I saw pictures on the walls. They all depicted young women with terror in their eyes. My gaze rested on the table in the center of the room. On it lay an old album with clippings from newspapers. Each article talked about disappearances and murders that had occurred in the region over the past 10 years. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized I had stumbled upon the lair of a serial killer. I immediately left the house, trying to stay calm, even though everything inside me was screaming about danger. Returning to the tent, I decided to pack my things and leave this place as soon as possible. But when I started to gather, I heard someone watching me. Looking around, I saw a shadow among the trees. It was something or someone that clearly didn't want me to go. I picked up my fishing knife, even though it seemed powerless against the threat I felt. Quickly gathering my things, I started to walk to the car. But suddenly someone grabbed my shoulder. I turned sharply and saw a man in a mask in front of me. He didn't say anything, just looked at me with cold eyes. I felt sweat running down my back. I managed to break free and run to my car. I started the engine and sped away, leaving this horrible forest behind. But even when I got home, I couldn't get rid of what I saw. A few days passed, but I could not forget what had happened. I started an investigation trying to find out more about those murders. The more I learned, the more I realized that these were not just random crimes. It was the work of the same maniac who carefully planned each of his murders. I found several newspaper articles describing the disappearance of women in the area. They were all young, attractive, and disappeared without a trace. The police didn't have any suspects, but I knew I had stumbled upon something important. I decided to contact the local police, but they did not take me seriously. Realizing that there is no need to rely on official structures, I decided to act independently. I found the contacts of the relatives of some of the missing women and contacted them. They were all desperate and looking for some kind of clue. One evening, I got a call from a woman named Amanda. She said that her sister disappeared a few months ago, and she also suspects that it has something to do with that maniac. We agreed to meet at a cafe to discuss the details. When I saw Amanda, I could tell she was very excited but determined to find her sister. She said that her sister, Linda, was always careful, but before she disappeared, she noticed a man watching her. Amanda found a note in her room with an address that led to the same abandoned house I was in. Part 5. We decided to go back to that house together to find new evidence. Arriving there at night, we tried to be careful not to attract attention. The entrance to the house was the same as I left it. We carefully went inside, and I saw those horrible pictures on the walls again. Amanda found a diary that belonged to one of the victims. She began to read aloud, and with each page, our sense of dread only increased. This maniac did not just kill his victims, he tortured them, forcing them to experience the worst nightmares. When we heard footsteps outside the door, I knew we were trapped. Amanda grabbed the diary and we started looking for a way to escape. But the door closed in front of us, and we realized that now we would face the maniac himself, face to face. My heart was beating like never before. I grabbed Amanda's hand and pulled her to the nearest window, but it was bricked up. The silence in the house became unbearable. Only our heavy breaths broke this dead silence. The steps were getting closer. Each step echoed in our heads. I heard Amanda cry, her fear becoming my fear. I raised my fishing knife, but what could it do against this monster? The door slowly opened and a shadow entered the room. He stood in front of us. It seemed that his cold gaze penetrated the very soul. I mustered all my will, trying not to sound helpless. Amanda stood nearby, shaking, tears streaming down her face. "What do you want from us?" I asked, trying not to show my fear. "You shouldn't have come here," he answered coldly. I could feel the tension rising with each passing second. The shadow took a step forward, and I realized that there was no more time to escape. I rushed at him with a knife, but he turned out to be stronger and faster. With one movement, he threw me against the wall, and I lost consciousness. When I came to, I found Amanda and I tied up in the basement of the house. Amanda was crying, and the maniac was standing over her with a creepy smile on his face. I could feel panic rising inside me, but I knew I had to stay calm for our survival. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, trying to distract him from Amanda. "You have no idea that you have come across such a place," he answered, coming closer to me. "There are many people like you here. You are just another page in my book." He raised the knife, and I felt a cold sweat run down my back. Amanda screamed, but her screams were drowned by the maniac's creepy laughter. I knew I had to do something, but my hands were tied and I saw no way out. I began to scan the room for any chance of escape. On the wall, I saw an old key hanging on a nail. My hope for salvation revived. When the maniac turned away, I started trying to get the key with my bound hands. My fingers were shaking, but I managed to remove the key and put it in my pocket. Now it was necessary to wait for the right moment. The maniac came closer and closer, and I felt every muscle in my body tense with fear. At the moment when he was about to strike, I quickly pulled out the key and tried to untie the ropes on my hands. The maniac noticed my actions and rushed at me, but I was able to avoid his attack. The key was still in my hand, and I continued to fight for my life. Amanda shouted, trying to get his attention away from me. Her screams were filled with pain and despair, but they gave me time. Finally, I managed to untie the ropes, and I rushed at the maniac, using the key as a weapon. The maniac and I wrestled, our bodies clashing like wild animals. He was stronger, but my desperation and fear gave me strength. I hit him in the chest with the key with all my might. He groaned and backed away, his eyes still burning with hatred. Amanda found the strength to stand up and began to help me. We both fought him, feeling like our lives were hanging in the balance. Finally, we managed to knock him to the ground and tie him with our own ropes. When it was over, Amanda and I could barely stand. Our bodies were covered in bruises and scratches, but we were alive. We called the police and waited for them to arrive, holding each other. The police arrived quickly and the maniac was arrested. They found evidence that confirmed his involvement in numerous murders. Amanda and I were released, but the experience left an indelible mark on our souls. After that, Amanda and I remained friends. We supported each other, trying to forget the horrors we had experienced. But even years later, I can still feel that maniac's cold gaze seep into my dreams, reminding me that horror may be closer than we think. This story became a lesson for me. Never underestimate the power of evil, and always be prepared for the worst. I never returned to that forest, but the memory of those events stayed with me forever. Days and weeks passed, but that cold look of a maniac haunted me even in everyday life. I tried to forget, but the nightmares kept coming back. Amanda suffered too, although we tried to support each other. One day when I came home from work, I saw a note on my door. It was written, "This is not the end yet." My heart started beating faster again and panic gripped me. I realized that the maniac did not act alone. I called Amanda and told her about the note. She was as scared as I was. We decided to meet and discuss what to do next. When we were sitting in the cafe, I noticed that we were being watched. The shadow sitting a few tables away from us seemed familiar. We decided to leave early to avoid danger. As we were leaving, I felt someone grab my shoulder. Turning around, I saw a man in black. He handed me the envelope and disappeared into the crowd. We opened the envelope and found a photograph inside. They were Amanda and I, taken in different places over the last few days. I realized that we were being followed and watched at every step. Panic gripped me again. Who is this new enemy? Was he related to that maniac? We decided to contact the police, but again, they did not take us seriously. They thought it was just a joke or an attempt to scare us. But I knew it was something more. We were in danger, and this realization oppressed me. We decided to take matters into our own hands. They began an investigation, looking for connections between the maniac and the new stalker. We studied old cases, visited places of disappearances, and talked to relatives of the victims. One day, we came across a strange detail. All the victims had one common acquaintance, It was a man named Jonathan who worked in the local library. We decided to visit it and learn more. When we arrived at the library, Jonathan greeted us with a friendly smile. He looked like an ordinary librarian, but I could see something disturbing in his eyes. We started asking him about the missing women, and he seemed willing to help. But during our conversation, I noticed how his face changed. He became nervous, and his eyes began to run. I understood that he was hiding something. As we left the library, I told Amanda that Jonathan knew something. She agreed with me, and we decided to keep an eye on him. At night, we returned to the library and saw him leaving the building with a large bag. We followed him, keeping our distance. He led us to an old house on the outskirts of town. We saw him go inside and decided to wait. After some time, we ventured inside. It was dark and scary inside the house. We walked through the corridors, trying not to make too much noise. Finally, we heard voices. As we got closer, we saw Jonathan and another man who looked like the maniac we had already met. It was his twin brother. We stood, hiding in the shadows, listening to their conversation. They were planning another murder, and I felt fear wash over me. Suddenly, the floor creaked under our feet, and the brothers turned their attention to us. We rushed to run away, but they were already on our trail. We ran through the dark corridors, hearing their footsteps approaching. Amanda tripped and fell, and I helped her up. Finally, we ran out of the house and rushed to the car. But when we got inside, we found that the tires were flat. We are trapped. The brothers approached, their faces contorted with anger. I felt that our chances of survival were slipping away by the second. At that moment, I thought of an old farm nearby where we could hide. We ran there, trying to stay together. The night was dark and cold, and our breaths broke the silence. When we got to the farm, I heard someone approaching. We hid in an old barn, trying not to make any sound. The brothers passed us by, but I knew it was only a matter of time before they found us. I started looking for something that could be a weapon. Finally, I found an old axe. It was hard to hold him, but I knew we had no choice. We must fight for our lives. The brothers returned and began to search the barn. I felt adrenaline fill my body. When one of them came closer, I rushed at him with an axe. He dodged, but I was able to injure him. The other brother lunged at me and we fell to the ground. I felt him tighten his grip on my throat and I was losing strength by the second. Amanda raised her axe and struck him, forcing him to retreat. We fought together, knowing this was our last chance. Finally, we managed to knock down the brothers and tie them up. We called the police and this time they came quickly. The brothers were arrested and we were saved. This terrible experience changed us forever. We knew we could never forget what we had experienced, but we were alive, and that was the most important thing. We decided to leave the city and start a new life somewhere, away from these nightmares. Amanda and I moved to another state trying to put the past behind us. But even in a new place, we could not forget those terrible events. Every day we fought our fears, trying to find peace. One day, while we were sitting at home, I received another note. On it was written, "I will find you." My heart pounded again with fear. We realized that our nightmare was not over yet. We decided to turn to a private detective to find out who is stalking us. The detective we hired was experienced and confident. He began an investigation, and his findings were disturbing. It turned out that we were being watched since we moved. Surveillance cameras recorded a suspicious man near our house. We were once again trapped in the horror we had hoped to leave behind. Amanda was on the verge of a nervous breakdown, and I tried to support her even though I was barely able to handle the pressure myself. We began to live in constant fear, checking the doors and windows before going to bed. The detective promised to find the stalker and protect us, but time passed and the situation did not improve. One evening, when I was returning home, I felt that someone was following me. I quickened my pace, but the shadow remained behind. When I finally got home, the door was all locked. I quickly jumped inside to find Amanda sitting with her phone in her hand, her face white with fear. "He was here," she whispered. "He knows where we live." My heart was pounding again, and I knew we couldn't stay here any longer. We decided to temporarily move to a hotel, hoping that it would give us some time to think. We felt a little safer at the hotel, but the fear still haunted us. We couldn't sleep, listening to every noise, every creak. A detective contacted us and said he found something important. He came to the hotel and showed us the photos. They were wearing the same man who was watching us. The detective recognized him as Paul, a friend of our maniac's twin brother. Paul was a professional stalker and had a long history of abusing his victims. He was smart, careful, and very dangerous. The detective warned us that Paul would not stop until he achieved his goal. We began to live in constant motion, changing hotels every few days, trying to remain unnoticed. But every time we thought we could hide, Paul found us again. His persistence was frightening. I could feel our strength draining away, but we couldn't give up. One day, when we were moving to a new hotel, I noticed a strange car following us. I tried to break away from him, but the car continued to follow us. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel and I could feel a cold sweat running down my back. We found an abandoned house on the outskirts of town and decided to hide there for a while. The house was old and neglected, but we had nowhere to go. We barricaded the doors and windows, trying to create the illusion of security. Night came quickly and we stayed in the dark listening to every sound. I heard the floor creak and my heart stopped. We hid in one of the rooms, holding hands. Our breaths were quiet, but I could feel the fear filling both of us. Suddenly, the door of the room opened and Paul stood in the doorway. His face was distorted with a sinister smile. He took a step forward and we felt panic wash over us. I remembered the axe we had brought with us from the farm and rushed to it. Paul was faster than I expected. He hit me and I fell to the floor. Amanda screamed, trying to pull him away from me, but Paul was too strong. I gathered all my strength and grabbed the axe, hit him with all his might, and he backed away, surprised and wounded. Amanda and I found ourselves fighting for our lives again. Paul was wounded, but not defeated. I could feel the adrenaline filling my body, giving me the strength to fight. Finally, we were able to knock him down and tie him up. We called the police and they came to arrest Paul. But even in handcuffs, he continued to threaten us, his eyes burning with hatred. I knew it wasn't the end, but at least we were safe for a while. After everything that happened, Amanda and I decided to change our names and start a new life in another country. We could no longer live in constant fear and anxiety. We said goodbye to the detective and thanked him for his help. The new beginning was difficult, but we tried to find peace again. We found a job and started building a new life. But even in a new country, I felt that our nightmare was not over. One day, when I was coming home, I saw a new note on the door. On it was written, "I will still find you." My heart pounded again with fear. I realized that Paul was not acting alone. He had accomplices who continued his business. I decided it was time to put an end to this horror. Amanda and I began preparations for the final battle. We contacted the International Security Service and told them about our situation. They agreed to help us, but we knew that the final decision would be ours. We started training, gaining strength, and improving our self-defense skills. Every day was filled with terror and tension, but we couldn't afford to break down. Every day we lived as if on a powder keg, ready for an explosion. Amanda was learning to shoot, and I was learning martial arts. We were determined not to let horror ruin our lives again. The detective we hired didn't let us down either. He organized a special team to help us train and ensure our safety. We knew that Paul was not alone, and his accomplices could appear at any moment. We had to be ready for anything. One evening, when we were returning from training, I noticed that we were being chased again. The black car following us looked familiar. I quickly changed my route, trying to break away from my pursuers. Amanda kept her hand on the handle of the gun, ready for any situation. We stopped at an old warehouse on the outskirts of town. After getting out of the car, we went inside and waited, hoping that the pursuers would pass by. But they were not going to back down. The shadows were getting closer, and I felt the adrenaline rush through my body. They entered the warehouse, 3 men in dark clothes. Their faces were distorted with sinister smiles. I grabbed the crowbar and prepared for battle. Amanda took aim at one of the men and ordered him to stop, but they did not listen, continuing to approach. The battle started instantly. I hit one of the attackers with the crowbar, sending him to the ground. Amanda fired a shot but missed, and the bullet hit the wall. One of the attackers grabbed her arm, trying to knock the gun out. I rushed to help and we managed to knock him down. We fought desperately for our lives. Every blow and shot was filled with fear and rage. The attackers were well prepared, but we couldn't let them win. Amanda hit the second assailant and he fell with a cry of pain. The last of the attackers grabbed me by the throat, trying to strangle me. I could feel the air leaving my lungs and my eyes darkening, but Amanda ran up and hit him over the head with the butt of the gun, freeing me from his grip. We stood among the fallen bodies, panting and feeling our hearts pounding. It was a tough battle, but we survived. Amanda put her arms around me, and I could feel the tears running down her cheeks. We knew that this was only the beginning, and that we still had many challenges ahead of us. We called the detective, and he came right away. After surveying the attackers, he confirmed our worst fears. They were Paul's accomplices, and they were ready to go to any lengths to find us. We realized that we can no longer hide. It's time to act. The detective advised us to develop a plan and strike first. We had to find Paul and his accomplices and stop them once and for all. We decided to start by looking for information about their meeting places and hiding places. Amanda did the scouting while the detective and I planned our actions. We knew it would be dangerous, but there was no other way out. Our search led us to an old house on the outskirts of town. This place was well defended, but we could not retreat. We prepared everything we needed and went there at night. Our plan was simple: break in, neutralize the security, and find Paul. We approached the house quietly, trying not to attract attention. Amanda took down the guard at the entrance and we went inside. The house was dark and quiet, but we knew it was only a temporary calm before the storm. We moved through the corridors, listening carefully to every sound. Suddenly, we heard voices in one of the rooms. We crept closer and saw Paul with several of his accomplices. They were discussing a plan to find and destroy us. I signaled to Amanda and we burst into the room. The shooting began. Bullets were flying in all directions and we were desperately trying to stay alive. Paul ran out the back door and I ran after him. We ran out into the backyard and I saw Paul trying to escape over the fence. I fired and the bullet hit him in the leg. He fell and I quickly went to him. Paul tried to get the gun, but I knocked it out of his hands. "That's the end, Paul," I said, holding him in my sights. "You don't know anything yet," he rasped. "There is someone else." Paul didn't tell me anything else, just kept smiling his sinister smile. The police arrived and took him into custody. Amanda and I were exhausted, but we knew it wasn't the end. We returned home and began to prepare for a new stage of struggle. We had to find that mysterious person Paul was talking about and stop him before he found us. The following days were tense. We worked with a detective, gathering information and preparing for possible attacks. Each day brought new challenges, but we were determined not to give up. Amanda became a real fighter. She learned to defend herself and helped me in everything. Our connection became even stronger, and we knew that together we could overcome any difficulties. One day we received a message from a detective. He found new information about the mysterious person Paul was looking for. He was a former military man who had ties to the criminal world. His name was Jonathan, and he was known for his cruelty and ruthlessness. We realized that our next goal was to find and stop Jonathan. We began to prepare for this dangerous mission, knowing that it would be the most difficult of all that we had to endure. Our search led us to a small town where Jonathan had his hideouts. We carefully planned our actions, not wanting to make any mistakes. Amanda and I gathered all our strength and went to the town at night. We found the house where, according to our information, Jonathan was hiding. It was an old abandoned mansion on the outskirts of town. The door was locked, but we knew there might be traps inside. Carefully entering, we heard footsteps echoing in the darkness. The place was like a trap, and every corner was potentially dangerous. We moved through the corridors, listening carefully to every sound. Suddenly, we heard whispers and footsteps. Amanda raised her gun, ready for any eventuality. We were getting closer to the source of the sound, and I felt the chill seeping into my bones. Suddenly, the door opened, and we saw Jonathan. His eyes had an ominous glint, and he smiled as if he knew something we didn't. He was tall, muscular, with a face that gave off cruelty. In his hands, he held a knife that glinted in the moonlight that filtered through the broken windows. "Congratulations," he said coldly. "I was waiting for you." I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. We found ourselves in the center of his trap. Jonathan took a step forward, and I realized that our chances of survival were slipping away. Amanda fired a shot, but Jonathan dodged with incredible speed. He rushed at us, and we began a desperate fight for our lives. The battle was brutal. Jonathan was strong and fast. His every blow was deadly. I tried to hit him with the crowbar, but he grabbed my arm and punched me in the stomach. Pain ran through my whole body, but I did not give up. Amanda raised the gun and fired again, this time hitting him in the shoulder. Jonathan cried out in pain, but it only made him more angry. He lunged at Amanda, trying to knock the weapon out of her hands. I grabbed him by the throat, trying to pull him away from her. Jonathan pushed me away and I fell to the floor, feeling the air leave my lungs. Amanda fought with all her might, but he was too strong. I mustered the last of my strength and rushed at Jonathan again. We fell to the floor and I tried to hold him while Amanda got up. She took the knife that had fallen from his hands and stabbed him in the side. Jonathan howled in pain but did not give up. He grabbed me by the throat, trying to strangle me. I could feel my eyes getting dark and my strength leaving me. Amanda lunged at him, stabbing again. Jonathan released me and I inhaled the air greedily. We both stepped back, trying to recover from the fight. Jonathan stood up slowly, holding on to his injured shoulder. His face contorted with rage. "This is not the end," he said, looking at us with hatred. "You don't know what you're up against yet." We realized that we had to stop him once and for all. Jonathan rushed at us with the last of his strength and we entered the battle again. Amanda fired at him, but he managed to dodge. I grabbed the crowbar and hit him with all the strength I had. Jonathan fell to the floor, bleeding from several wounds. We stood over him, panting and feeling the fear and adrenaline leave. Jonathan was no longer moving, his eyes closed. We won that battle, but we knew it wasn't over yet. It was necessary to find and neutralize all his accomplices in order to put an end to this horror forever. We returned home feeling exhausted and relieved at the same time. The detective confirmed Jonathan's death, but warned that the danger was not yet over. We had to deal with all the remaining threats, and we prepared for it with all seriousness. Every day was filled with tension and fear, but we could not afford to break down. Amanda became my greatest support, and we knew that together we would overcome all difficulties. Our lives had changed forever, and we were ready for new challenges. We spent the following days analyzing the information and planning our actions. We knew there was still a lot of work ahead, but we couldn't afford to relax. Every day we trained and improved our skills, preparing for new encounters with danger. Amanda has become a real fighter. Her determination and willpower amazed me. We became a team that was ready to overcome any obstacles. Our hearts beat in unison, and we knew that together we could overcome anything. One day we received new information from a detective. He found traces of another group of Jonathan's accomplices who may have been involved in his crimes. We set out to find these people, knowing that this might be our last chance to stop them. We arrived at an old warehouse on the outskirts of town where, according to our information, Jonathan's accomplices were hiding. We went inside, ready for any surprises. Darkness enveloped us, and we felt adrenaline fill our bodies. We heard footsteps and voices. Amanda raised her gun, ready to fight. We moved through the corridors, trying not to give away our presence. Suddenly, one of the accomplices came out from around the corner. He was tall, vicious, with eyes burning with hatred. "Ah, you're here again," he said, smiling sinisterly. "Decided to face fate?" We understood that it would be another tough battle. Jonathan's teammates were well prepared, but we couldn't let them win. The battle started instantly. Bullets were flying in all directions, and we were desperately trying to stay alive. Amanda fired several accurate shots, neutralizing the two accomplices. I lunged at the third, hitting him with all my might. The fight was fierce, but we were determined not to give up. Our hearts were beating in unison, and we knew we had to win. It seemed that everything was over. We stood among the corpses of Jonathan's accomplices, feeling the adrenaline slowly drain away, giving way to exhaustion. Amanda examined the wounds on my body, her eyes filled with worry. We knew that this night would leave a deep mark in our memory. "We need to go home and rest," Amanda said, trying to get me to move. We walked out of the abandoned warehouse, feeling the cold wind cool our wounds. We thought it was over, but deep down I felt that something was still wrong. An invisible threat hung in the air, and we couldn't ignore that feeling. At home, we decided to review all the records and evidence again. We needed to be sure that there were no threads left that could lead to new threats. We spent the night at work, sifting through documents and analyzing every detail. Suddenly, Amanda raised her head, her face pale. "There's another address here," she whispered. I missed it earlier. It was an old estate outside the city. The look of the house in the photo gave me goosebumps. We realized that we had to go there and make sure that there was no more threat.